What would you do if the life you saved turned out to hold the key to a secret you never expected? A millionaire adopts a beggar's baby, but the truth he uncovers years later will leave you speechless. Nicholas Everly, a self-made millionaire in his early 40s, lived in the lap of luxury but battled an unshakable loneliness. His sprawling estate, filled with artifacts and memories of his late parents, echoed with a silence that wealth couldn't fill. Behind his confident demeanor lay a man yearning for something more profound than success. Meanwhile, just a few miles away, a young woman named Clara struggled to provide for her newborn son, Jacob. Left homeless after a series of misfortunes, Clara often found herself begging in the bustling streets of New York, clutching her baby close to shield him from the harsh world around them. Their worlds collided one stormy evening when Nicholas, driving home from a late meeting, spotted Clara on the curb. Rain poured as she tried to keep her baby warm under a tattered coat. Unable to ignore the scene, Nicholas pulled over. For a man who often prided himself on pragmatism, this was an impulsive moment. "Get in," he said, his voice firm but laced with compassion. Clara hesitated, her instincts warning her to be cautious, but Jacob's whimpering cries pushed her to take a chance. She stepped into Nicholas's car, unaware that this moment would change all three of their lives forever. Nicholas brought Clara and Jacob to his mansion, offering them warmth, food. The stark contrast between his marble-floored estate and Clara's destitution was not lost on either of them. Clara, overwhelmed by his kindness, broke down in tears as Nicholas handed her a hot cup of tea. "Why would someone like you help someone like me?" she asked. Nicholas shrugged, masking the vulnerability he rarely let show. "I've been fortunate in life. Sometimes it's good to give back," he said simply, though deep inside he felt a connection to her struggles he couldn't yet articulate. Over the next few days, Nicholas learned of Clara's tragic journey, abandoned by her partner, estranged from her family, and forced to fend for herself and her baby on the unforgiving streets. Her story stirred something in Nicholas. Memories of his own childhood, marred by the early loss of his parents, came rushing back. When Clara expressed her wish for Jacob to have a stable life, Nicholas made an extraordinary offer. "Let me adopt Jacob. I can give him the life you want for him, a life you deserve, but can't provide right now." It was a moment of heartbreak and hope as Clara reluctantly agreed, setting in motion a story of redemption and hidden truths. Clara's decision to let Nicholas adopt Jacob wasn't made lightly. She spent the entire night beside her son, whispering promises and prayers. She told him softly, her tears soaking the makeshift blanket she had carried for so long. The following morning, the formalities began. Nicholas ensured everything was handled with care and respect. Clara signed the documents, her hands trembling as she entrusted her son's future to a stranger. Nicholas, meanwhile, assured her that Jacob would always know about her sacrifice. Life in Nicholas's mansion brought Jacob a world far removed from his beginnings. Over the years, the boy grew into a bright, inquisitive child. Nicholas, once a reserved and lonely man, found himself transformed by fatherhood. Jacob's laughter filled the once empty halls, and his boundless curiosity often pushed Nicholas to revisit the simpler joys of life he'd long forgotten. But Nicholas noticed something peculiar. The boy's resemblance to Clara's late partner, whom she had described briefly during their first conversation, was uncanny. Those same sharp features and piercing blue eyes haunted Nicholas. He brushed it off initially, chalking it up to coincidence. Yet the thought lingered, like a distant echo growing louder with time. Despite the happiness Jacob brought into his life, Nicholas couldn't shake a sense of unease. He had built a strong bond with his adopted son, becoming both a nurturing father and an ever-curious observer of Jacob's talents and quirks. Jacob's precocious nature, his natural affinity for numbers and strategic thinking, seemed out of place for a child so young. It reminded Nicholas of someone from his own past. As Jacob grew, Nicholas kept a private room filled with mementos and photographs of the adoption process, including Clara's letters, which she had occasionally sent after leaving Jacob in Nicholas's care. These letters painted a picture of a woman struggling to rebuild her life, though she never once asked for anything in return. One day, while organizing some old files, Nicholas stumbled upon a forgotten detail: the name of Jacob's biological father. The name didn't register initially, but as he stared at it, a wave of recognition hit him like a tidal surge. Suddenly, fragmented memories began piecing together a distant business deal, a name from a scandalous affair, and an unresolved betrayal from years ago. Nicholas realized there was a deeper connection between his life and Jacob's origins, one he hadn't anticipated. The answers lay hidden, waiting to be unearthed. As the years passed, Jacob became the center of Nicholas's world, a light in a life once shadowed by isolation. Yet the nagging suspicion about Jacob's origins began to occupy more of Nicholas's thoughts. Clara's letters, always kind and hopeful, never hinted at the identity of Jacob's father, though Nicholas had never asked directly. One evening after Jacob had gone to bed, Nicholas sat in his study with a glass of wine. The faint hum of the fireplace filled the room as he sifted through Clara's letters, adoption documents, and the name of Jacob's father, Richard Fenton. The name gnawed at him, tugging at memories buried under decades of business deals and partnerships. Richard Fenton had been a rising star in financia, brilliant but ruthless man who had built his fortune through aggressive tactics. Nicholas recalled a bitter rivalry during his early years in business, when Fenton had swooped in on a deal Nicholas had meticulously planned, leaving him financially vulnerable. The betrayal was personal and brutal, a turning point in Nicholas's career that had taught him to trust no one. But how did Clara fit into Fenton's life, and how had Jacob ended up with her? The answers were out there, and Nicholas vowed to uncover them. The next morning, Nicholas decided to take action. He hired a private investigator, Karen Price, a no-nonsense professional known for her discretion. Meeting her in his office, Nicholas handed over the fragmented pieces of the puzzle. "I need to know everything about this man," he said, sliding a photo of Richard Fenton across the desk. "And how he's connected to Clara and Jacob." Karen nodded, taking the assignment without hesitation. "I'll need a few weeks," she said. "If T here is something to find, I'll find it." Meanwhile, life with Jacob continued to evolve. The boy, now 10 years old, displayed an extraordinary talent for chess, a game Nicholas had introduced to him during rainy afternoons. Jacob's ability to strategize and outmaneuver even seasoned players astonished Nicholas. Watching him play reminded Nicholas of his own youth, when he had fought tooth and nail to climb the corporate ladder. One weekend, Nicholas took Jacob to a local chess tournament. As they entered the bustling community center, Jacob's eyes lit up with excitement. He advanced through the rounds effortlessly, drawing the attention of a small crowd. Among the onlookers was a gray-haired man who seemed oddly familiar to Nicholas. Their eyes met briefly, and the man smiled faintly before disappearing into the crowd. The moment unsettled Nicholas. He couldn't shake the feeling that the man's presence wasn't coincidental. Later that night, Nicholas replayed the encounter in his mind. The man's face, though aged, bore a striking resemblance to Richard Fenton. But why would Fenton or someone connected to him be at a children's chess tournament? A week later, Karen returned with her findings. Sitting across from Nicholas in his study, she laid out a series of documents and photographs. "Richard Fenton was Clara's employer," Karen began, her tone measured. "She worked as his assistant for 2 years before leaving abruptly. Based on her financial records, she received a substantial payment just before Jacob was born." Nicholas felt a chill run down his spine. A payment? For what? Karen hesitated. "It appears Clara signed a non-disclosure agreement. Whatever the nature of their relationship, Fenton wanted to keep it quiet." The revelation hit Nicholas hard. Had Clara been coerced into something she couldn't talk about? And if so, how had she ended up destitute with Jacob in her arms? Nicholas's heart ached at the thought of the struggles she must have endured. Karen continued, "T here is more. Fenton passed away 3 years ago. He left behind a fortune, but his estate was embroiled in legal battles. One document stood out an unfiled paternity claim. It named Jacob as a potential heir." Nicholas leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. If Jacob was Fenton's son, it explained the uncanny resemblance and the boy's sharp mind. But why had Fenton never reached out? Why had he allowed Clara to suffer? Nicholas decided to confront Clara. Reaching out through the last address she had provided, he invited her to visit the mansion. When she arrived, her face showed a mixture of surprise and apprehension. The years had worn her, but her determination remained intact. As they sat in the library, Nicholas placed the documents on the table. "Clara," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I need you to tell me the truth about Jacob's father." Clara froze, her eyes darting to the papers. "Why now?" she whispered. "Because I deserve to know." "Jacob deserves to know," Nicholas replied. "This isn't just about the past, it's about his future." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she began to speak. "Richard Fenton was Jacob's father," she admitted. "But he wasn't a good man. When I found out I was pregnant, he wanted nothing to do with us. He paid me to disappear, to keep quiet. I took the money because I had no other choice, but I never spent a penny of it on myself. It all went to Jacob." Nicholas felt a mix of anger and sorrow. Fenton's actions were despicable, but Clara's strength in protecting Jacob was undeniable. He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Thank you for trusting me," he said softly. "We'll figure this out together." The revelation about Richard Fenton changed everything. Nicholas now carried the weight of a deeper truth, a truth that had the potential to redefine Jacob's identity and his future. But he also knew this wasn't a decision to be made in isolation. He needed to protect Jacob while honoring Clara's sacrifices and ensuring her voice was part of the conversation. A few days after their emotional talk, Nicholas invited Clara to stay in the guest house on his estate. It was an opportunity for her to reconnect with Jacob, though Nicholas hadn't yet revealed her true identity to his son. Watching Jacob and Clara interact during casual encounters, Nicholas couldn't help but marvel at how naturally Jacob, unaware of the connection, was drawn to Clara's warmth, while Clara seemed to light up around her. One afternoon, as Jacob played in the garden, Nicholas and Clara watched from a distance. "He is," Nicholas replied, his gaze fixed on. Then, after a pause, he added, "Clara, we need to tell him the truth. He has the right to know who his mother isn't, who his father." Clara hesitated, her hands trembling. "I don't want to confuse him, Nicholas. He's happy. What if this changes everything?" Nicholas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It will change everything, but not necessarily for the worse. Jacob deserves the chance to understand where he came from, and you deserve to be part of his life." They agreed to tell Jacob together, deciding to approach the conversation with honesty and care. Nicholas, however, also realized that this revelation might open doors to more complications, particularly regarding Richard Fenton's. That evening, in the warmth of the living room, Nicholas and Clara sat down with Jacob. The boy was engrossed in a book, his love for stories evident in the way he barely noticed their presence. "Jacob," Nicholas began, his voice gentle, "can we talk to you for a moment?" Jacob looked up, curiosity in his wide eyes. "Sure, Dad." Nicholas exchanged a glance with Clara, who nodded, her expression a mix of nervousness and determination. "You know how I've always told you that you came into my life in a very special..." Nicholas continued. Jacob nodded. "Yeah, you said you adopted me because you wanted to give me a better life." "That's right," Nicholas said, his voice steady. "And part of that story involves someone very important." He gestured toward Clara. "Jacob, this is Clara. She's your biological..." Jacob's eyes widened as he turned to look at Clara. "You are my mom?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder and a touch of confusion. "Yes, Jacob," Clara said, her voice trembling but warm. "I gave birth to you. I loved you from the moment I held you in my arms. And though I couldn't raise you, I never stopped thinking about..." For a moment, there was silence as Jacob processed the revelation. "But why didn't you keep me?" he finally asked, his tone innocent. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Because I couldn't give you the life you deserved. I wasn't strong enough back then." Jacob turned to Nicholas, his eyes brimming with emotion. "You knew all this?" "I did," Nicholas admitted. "And I promised Clara I'd take care of you, no matter what. But I also wanted you to have the chance to know her, to know the whole story." Jacob looked back at Clara, a small smile forming on his lips. "So, you are my mom, but you are also kind of like a friend I didn't know I had." The room filled with warmth as Clara pulled Jacob into a gentle embrace, tears of joy streaming down her face. Nicholas watched the moment unfold, his heart swelling with both pride and... The reunion between Clara and Jacob brought a sense of peace, but it was only the beginning of a larger storm brewing on the horizon. As the days passed, Jacob began asking more questions about his biological father. "If Clara is my mom, who's my dad?" he asked one evening as they sat together in the study. Nicholas exchanged a glance with Clara. They had agreed to tell Jacob the truth, but were careful about how much to reveal. "Your father's name was Richard Fenton," Nicholas said cautiously. He was a successful man, but he made some poor choices. When your mother found out she was having you, he didn't want to be involved. Jacob frowned. He didn't want. Clara quickly stepped in, her voice firm yet. It wasn't about you, Jacob. He didn't know how to be a father. But that's not your fault. Jacob seemed to accept her words, but Nicholas couldn't ignore the unease that lingered in the boy's. The mention of Richard Fenton's name felt like opening a door to the past. Nicholas wasn't sure he wanted Jacob to walk through. Determined to protect Jacob, Nicholas reached out to his legal team. If Richard Fenton's estate had listed Jacob as a potential heir, it could bring complications. The family's lawyers might contest the claim, or even attempt to undermine Jacob's legitimate. At the same time, Karen Price, the private investigator, delivered another startling discovery. Before he passed, Fenton kept a journal. It's in the possession of his sister, Victoria Fenton, who's the executor of his estate. Nicholas's grip tightened on the phone. That's the tricky part, Karen had. Victoria's not exactly the welcoming type, but she's fiercely protective of family. If Jacob is her nephew, it might change her perspective. It's a gamble. Nicholas decided it was a risk worth taking. If the journal contained information about Fenton's thoughts or intentions, it could provide clarity or complicate things even. A week later, Nicholas, Clara, and Jacob traveled to Victoria Fenton's estate, a sprawling property on the outskirts of Boston. The tension in the air was palpable as they approached the ornate front. Nicholas had prepared for resistance, but he couldn't help feeling apprehensive about the confrontation. Victoria, a stern woman in her 50s with sharp features and an air of authority, greeted them with suspicion. "Nicholas Everly," she said, her tone icy. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Nicholas introduced Clara and Jacob, carefully explaining the situation. Victoria's gaze softened only slightly as she looked at Jacob, her eyes narrowing as though searching for a resemblance to her late brother. "And you are telling me this boy is Richard's son?" she asked, her voice carrying equal parts disbelief and curiosity. "Yes," Clara said firmly. "He is." Victoria studied them in silence for a moment, before gesturing for them to come inside. The group was led into a grand sitting room, where Victoria poured herself a glass of wine. "Richard wasn't exactly known for his moral compass," she said, her voice laced with bitterness. "But if what you are saying is true, then this boy deserves to know his heritage." Victoria retrieved the journal from a locked cabinet and handed it to Nicholas. "Be warned," she said. Later that evening, back at Nicholas's mansion, the three of them gathered in the study to read the journal. It revealed a complicated man driven by ambition and greed, but also plagued by regret. Richard had written about Clara, acknowledging his failure to support her and his fear of father. But one entry stood out. "If I could go back, I'd make things right. This child deserves better." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she read the words. Nicholas placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his own emotions raw. "Knew he made mistakes," Nicholas said softly, but he also knew Jacob was worth more than his own pride. For Jacob, the journal was a window into a man he would never meet, a man who had shaped his life without even knowing him. "I am glad I know the truth," he said quietly, "but I am even happier I have you both." The weight of Richard Fenton's journal lingered in the air, its words revealing both guilt and regret. The next morning, the mansion was quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by contemplative stillness. Nicholas sat in the sunlit study, the journal open on his lap. Across from him, Clara sipped her coffee, her eyes distant as she reflected on the revelations of the previous day. Jacob entered the room, his steps hesitant but determined. "Dad," he said softly, addressing Nicholas with a maturity beyond his years. "Can I talk to you?" Nicholas nodded, patting the seat beside him. Jacob climbed up and looked at the journal still resting on his father's lap. "I've been thinking," Jacob began, his voice steady. "I am glad I know about my real dad, but I feel like he's a story. You are the one who's been here for me." Nicholas's chest tightened with emotion. "Jacob, being your dad has been the greatest gift of my life. But knowing where you came from is important too. It's a part of who you are." Jacob nodded. "It is, but I think the person I am today is because of you and Clara. She gave me life, and you gave me everything else. I think I want us to be a family." Clara, who had been listening quietly, felt her heart swell. "We are a family, Jacob. We always will." The three sat together, an unspoken bond strengthening between them. Nicholas realized that no amount of wealth or success could ever compare to the love and connection they had. For Jacob, the truth about his father was not a shadow, but a reminder of how far love and sacrifice had. In the weeks that followed, life at the mansion took on a new rhythm. Clara, now an official part of their lives, moved into a nearby cottage on the estate. She and Nicholas worked together to ensure Jacob felt supported and loved as he navigated his new reality. Clara, encouraged by Nicholas, decided to pursue a long-forgotten dream of hers, opening a small cafe. And it was a chance to create something for herself, to reclaim the independence she had sacrificed years ago. Nicholas offered to help finance the venture, but Clara insisted on doing it her. "You've given me so much already," she told him with a grateful smile. Meanwhile, Nicholas found himself changing in ways he hadn't anticipated. The ruthless businessman who once viewed relationships as liabilities was now hosting family dinners, cheering Jacob on at chess tournaments, and helping Clara paint the walls of her cafe. One evening, as the three of them sat together in the garden, Jacob looked up at the stars. "Do you think my other dad is watching me?" Clara rested a hand on his shoulder. "I think he'd be proud of the person you are," Nicholas added, "and he'd be grateful that you are surrounded by." Jacob smiled, the simple truth of their words settling in his heart. He wasn't defined by his origins or the mistakes of the past, but by the love and choices that shaped his. Months passed, and the mansion, once a place of solitude, became a hub of warmth and life. Clara's cafe, aptly named Second Chances, had its grand opening. Nestled on a bustling street corner, it quickly became a community favorite, serving homemade pastries and coffee brewed with care. Regulars included families, students, and even Nicholas, who often stopped by to admire Clara's resilience and share a quiet moment over a cup of coffee. Jacob loved helping out after school, taking orders and charming customers with his wit. It was his way of giving back, a reflection of the gratitude he carried for the life Clara and Nicholas had worked so hard to create for him. One evening, as the cafe prepared to close, Nicholas arrived with a special gift for Clara and Jacob. He handed Clara a beautifully wrapped box. Inside was a framed photo of the three of them, taken during a recent family picnic. The inscription on the bottom read, "Family isn't just about blood, it's about love, resilience, and the people who choose to stay." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she read the words, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Nicholas smiled, his gaze shifting to Jacob. "I should be thanking you both. You've shown me what really matters." The next few years brought even more joy and growth to their lives. Jacob thrived in school, his chess skills earning him local and national recognition. At one championship match, Nicholas and Clara sat in the front row, cheering him on with pride. As Jacob held his trophy high, he glanced at them, his face beaming. It was a moment he'd cherish forever, a moment of belonging, love, and triumph. Back at the mansion, Nicholas had made a significant decision. His sprawling estate, once a symbol of his isolation, would now serve as the headquarters for a foundation he'd started in Jacob's name. The Everly Fenton Foundation focused on providing education and resources for underprivileged children, ensuring that no child would face the struggles Jacob and Clara once had. On the foundation's launch day, Clara gave a heartfelt speech. "This isn't just about giving back," she said. "It's about honoring the past while building a brighter future for Jacob, for us, and for every child who deserves a second chance." That evening, as the family shared dinner in the mansion's garden, laughter filled the air. Jacob leaned against Nicholas, his small hand resting on his father's. "We're a team," Jacob said with a grin. Nicholas chuckled. "The best team." Under the starlit sky, surrounded by love and the promise of new beginnings, they knew they had found not just a family but a purpose born from the depths of sacrifice, redemption, and hope. Years later, the impact of their choices was evident in every facet of their lives. Jacob, now a teenager, had not only excelled academically but had also grown into a compassionate and thoughtful young man. His story became an inspiration to those around him, and his resilience served as a testament to the love and dedication he had received. Clara's cafe thrived, becoming a symbol of hope for many in the community. The walls of Second Chances displayed artwork and photos contributed by patrons, each piece telling a story of overcoming adversity. It wasn't just a place to eat, it was a sanctuary for those seeking connection and encouragement. Nicholas, now a mentor to underprivileged children through the foundation, often reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Gone was the man who had once measured success in profits and acquisitions. In his place stood someone who understood that true wealth was found in relationships and the lives he could touch. One evening, during a foundation gala held at the mansion, Nicholas gave a heartfelt speech. "Life has taught me that success isn't what we build for ourselves, but what we build for others. And if T here is one lesson Jacob has taught me, it's that every life deserves a second chance." The crowd erupted in applause, but for Nicholas, the greatest reward was seeing Clara and Jacob in the front row, their smiles reflecting the love that bound them together. On Jacob's 16th birthday, the family decided to celebrate with a quiet dinner in the garden. Clara cooked his favorite meal, and Nicholas brought out an old chessboard, a reminder of their many afternoons spent strategizing and laughing. As they sat under the twinkling fairy lights, Nicholas handed Jacob a small, wrapped gift. Inside was a watch, simple but elegant, with an inscription on the back. "For Jacob, our greatest treasure. Love, Mom and Dad." Jacob held the watch in his hands, his eyes misting with emotion. "Thank you," he said softly. "For everything." Nicholas pulled him into a hug, his heart full. That night, as the stars stretched endlessly above them, the family reflected on their journey, a path filled with challenges, sacrifices, and triumphs. Together, they had created a life built not on wealth or status, but on love, trust, and the unshakable belief in second chances. And as the laughter and warmth of the evening filled the garden, they knew this was only the beginning of a future bright with hope and possibility.